Hello all, and welcome back to another episode of TV and Us, a conversation show about the TV series we just can't stop talking about. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And each season we focus on a different show, reviewing it episode by episode, and we invite you to watch along with us. Right now, we are reviewing The Bear Season 1, and today we made it to the season finale of the first season, Episode 8, titled Braciole. If you haven't watched it yet, this is your spoiler. Please check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. All right, Sarah, we made it to the finale of Season 1. Do you want to kick us off with an IMDb summary for this finale?
All right, in the Bear fashion, this is a very short, efficient, to the point summary. All right, things get out of control. Carmy is faced with a decision.
Amazing.
Accurate.
Very accurate. Yep. Decisions were made. Things were out of control. Very much so.
Yeah.
Yes. So in TV and Us tradition, let's start off with our episode titles of choice for the season finale of The Bear Season 1. Sarah, what was your episode title?
Let It Rip.
Nice. I love it. My episode title is Spaghetti.
Nice.
All right. Well, let's dive in fully to get to talk about all of the things that this season finale delivers on. So much happens, a lot of relationships that we've been following over the course of the season really grow and evolve, and there's some resolutions and some great tee up for a season to follow right after this one. So tell me your thoughts on this season finale and what really stood out to you.
It's so good. Just like this entire season is solid. But this episode, I'm constantly impressed with the writing choices that this show has made. Because for this entire season, we've heard about Mikey, and he's kind of this otherworldly figure who we've heard a little bit about. We've seen him once before. We can kind of see everybody loved him. We can infer a lot of things about him. And then in this episode, we learn like what actually happened and how he was struggling and how he took his own life. And we learn a lot more about who Mikey was, and then in turn learn a lot more about who Carmy is. And I think it's so interesting that they wait until this episode to give us all of that information. And I think it's so smart because it's this buildup of what was their relationship like, what was Mikey like, and then here we finally get to understand a little bit more about him, and we learn a little bit more about Carmy's headspace, which he is not in a good place in this episode. I mean, he really hasn't been in a good place the whole season, but I feel like this episode is especially bad. And so you see maybe there's less chaos in the kitchen, but there's more chaos in Carmy. And I think that kind of colors this whole episode as things go wrong and he's having to pivot and figure things out. Like, the most chaotic part is within him and the emotions that he is dealing with. So I love the way that this episode sets all that up right from the start with Carmy's sharing an Al-Anon, and then that kind of just colors the whole episode. And then, like you said, it sets up a really good cliffhanger for season 2. So I think just all around, such good writing, great performances, just another really stellar episode.
Yes, this finale totally delivers on everything that the season has led up to, but especially that penultimate episode that we talked about last episode for number 7. Just the things really take a left turn in that episode, and we start off this episode figuring out how these reconciliations will happen between some of the relational divides that occur. And I think it's really fascinating to me while watching the episode how much we have to wait for the payoff and for those reconciliation moments to happen. You know, honestly, it's like we've got 10 minutes left of the episode, and I'm like, we haven't even seen Sydney and Carmi have a conversation yet. And I think that's something that the show, as I was reflecting on this finale episode, does really well, is it's able to know when to lean into the sentimentality, and it does so in a way that does not feel overly saccharine, but it really packs a punch. So that moment that they share at the end, where they're spitballing back and forth of this dream that they have together to establish a new restaurant and a new format and a new vision, like it just, because we had to wait for it, it hits so much harder when that moment happens in the last like 3 minutes of the entire episode. So I guess I was just so impressed at how much this season has made us wait for those payoffs. But also, you know, this, I think this episode in and of itself is kind of a microcosm of the way that the show really, you know, builds and lays those foundations for then that moment when that we've been waiting for to really pack a punch. There's some really great, some super fun things that this episode also does with the tomato sauce cans, and I think it's a perfect example of the way that the show rewards you catching all those little details, because that little line that Carmi has, I think in like one of the first 3 episodes, very early on the season, of like, hey, do you know why Mikey doesn't order the big cans? And someone's like, I don't really know. We don't really use tomato sauce anyway. And it's just a small little throwaway line. And they pay that off so well in not one instance that we think that we understood on the back of the index card of like, it tastes better, but it even in a bigger way. And that layering is just so much fun and really rewarding. So I love how long we get to wait for that payoff, and how those seeds were planted so much earlier in the season. So yeah, there's a lot of like moments between characters that I think we can talk a little bit more in detail, but those are my kind of overall thoughts on this finale. And you're right, the way that it tees up for the next season is genius. Like the bear is coming on the poster works for the context of this environment and in the setting, but also at a meta level, it's just like a signaling of like, oh no, we got more content for you with this group of characters. It didn't feel cheesy, like they're trying to set up and keep you hanging. It really felt right because there was the emotional stake. So all of that just also works really well.
Well, and what blew me away about the tomato cans this time around, this is what in the first episode I gasped because I didn't realize it the first time around, is I think it's Richie tells Carmi to make spaghetti in the first episode. And Carmi is like, no, I'm not going to. And if Carmi had just made spaghetti in the first episode, like he was told to, then he would have found all the money. And I didn't put that together the first time I watched it. I didn't catch it the first time. So going back around the second time when I watched that first episode, I gasped at that part because I was like, oh no, Carmi, just make the spaghetti, just make it, and you'll find out all the money that you need. So, I mean, just to your point of, this show is so smart and knew where it wanted to go from the beginning and laid those foundations in the first episode, which is just wild to me. And I mean, we've been just praising the writing this whole season of TV and Us, and I'm just going to continue to do that because it is so well written, and this episode contains so many callbacks to previous episodes too, and they just feel so well integrated into this story. They're just fun little nuggets that you can pick up and put in your basket, but if you don't remember those things, it's still enjoyable as is. So I think just shout out to the writers and the incredible work that they did on this episode and just this season in general.
Yes. And even those details that were sown throughout the season, like one of the ones that really stood out to me was Carmi pouring over like the financials and where the money is going and what is KPL. Like it doesn't feel out of the blue in this episode to maybe signal to us like, hey, there's something going on here, because throughout the entire season, he's just trying to figure out like how is Mikey spending his money? Like all of the records are really chaotic. They're going through the bins. There's the shit folder, you know, like that theme had already so much backdrop and Velcro context for that to stick to, so that it doesn't feel strange that Carmi's wondering what KBL's going, where the money is going. It feels very in line because that foundation had been laid. And so it makes that payoff really exciting because we're not really signaled to, hey, there's something that's there. The show's not like, hey, there's something funky happening here and we're going to tell you soon. Like, no, this just feels like Carmi's poring over the records once again to just try and figure out what is happening. And he's been doing that for so many of the other scenes throughout the season. So even that foundation laying and that backdrop really working well so that that payoff is even more thrilling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it's also surrounded by, a text from Uncle Jimmy saying, hit me, and,
Yeah.
the bachelor party to try and pay it off. So you can just feel the weight on Carmi's shoulders about finances. So, of course, he's going to go back into the books and trying to figure out Mikey's chaotic system of everything. Yeah, it's so good. This show knows exactly what it wants to accomplish, and then it gives you all of the ingredients to get you there in a way that just feels natural and right for these characters.
So satisfying. So satisfying. Um, One of the other aspects of the way that this episode, specifically as the finale, I thought was just such a interesting and smart choice is we start episode 1 of this season with an opening dream sequence for kind of getting into Carmi's headspace. And we see the bear, and the bear's back in this episode in the opening as well. And there's kind of this really great like mirroring and paralleling of bookending this entire season with opening the beginning and the ending episode with that opening dream sequence. And I think it's such a smart way for us to also get context and understand where Carmi's headspace is. I mean, from the first episode, it's helpful for us to just get to know who he is as a character. But I think in this final episode of the season, it really helps us frame everything else that happens, and we just come off of a really intense episode 7, so we can really understand kind of the burdens and the chaos and the anxiety that Carmi is feeling and the pressures. So I think that book ending is really fascinating as well. And both the first episode and the last episode start out with that structure.
Mm-hmm. And then that's just a perfect segue into him going to that Al-Anon meeting, which is, I think, my favorite part of this whole episode. And also shows growth for Carmi, because at the beginning of this season, he didn't want to go to a meeting when Sugar was suggesting it. He was like, no, I'm not doing that. And now, without any external prompting, he's like, hey, I need to go. And not only just to go, but to actually go up and share. And so I love that is a character growth moment in and of itself. But then you learn all about Mikey and their relationship. And Jeremy Allen White gives a phenomenal performance in that scene where the camera is just still on his face and it's absolutely silent except for him talking. And it's mesmerizing because it's such an incredible performance. And so what a testament to his ability. And I feel like, I mean, this whole season he's good, but in this episode, in that scene specifically, he is absolutely phenomenal.
He's so good. That was one of my running thoughts throughout that entire sequence. It's just like, man, Jeremy Allen White's acting is so good. I think it really carries a lot of that like center of gravity. I mean, he is our protagonist for this entire season, but you get to see him really shine because there's nothing else in the frame. There's nothing else for him to latch onto. And you see the complexity of emotion that is like washing over him as he's talking. It's also just a well-written sequence as well. There's just that whole long bit, the way that he can kind of bounce back and forth between like the funny moments or the lighthearted things about Mikey, and then jump straight in the next sentence into something that's really vulnerable and hard for him. And then he'll kind of come back out of it again and be like, but also like he was just this, and you can see him pendulum swinging in his own brain around all of those complex feelings that he has towards Mikey. And that is so accurate to the way that like we as human beings talk about hard things. You know, like we start and then it gets a little uncomfy and then we kind of like back ourselves out, just like, let me just make a joke or something, and then be ready to kind of dive in again to some of those hard feelings. And I feel like the writers captured that so well in that sequence. And man, that was just so good. It was so good. Well written, well acted. And the fact that the camera is still the whole time, I think it demands your attention. There is no cutting to a wide shot of the room or a side view. It's straight on, dead on in his face.
Yeah, and for the performance and the writing to be so compelling that is still engaging and interesting without having to rely on changing up the visuals is just a testament to everything you just said. It's such high quality and such a strong way to start this episode too. Like that's a pretty long monologue that he has, and especially for a show that is so chaotic, so fast moving, so tense and stressful and all of that, and then to have this moment of silent reflection and emotion to start out the finale of the season is a really bold creative choice, that I think is also really brilliant in setting up this whole episode, because that moment when the stove gets on fire and Carmi is just standing there watching it, you know, you can feel both this sense of like anxiety and dread and release from him all at the same time, because we've been in his headspace since the beginning of this episode. So I think it's such a smart way for us to better understand Carmi, and then we understand his decisions for the rest of the episode.
I'm so glad you brought up that scene because it's a perfect example of the way that this finale is calling back to and drawing upon all of those things that it trusts that we remembered along the way, and that nod back to the conversation that Carmi and Marcus had outside, sitting down that one time. I forget which episode it's in. It's probably like 4 or 5, somewhere in the middle. And they're both talking about like sometimes, you know, when there's a stove fire, you just kind of wonder if is it all worth it, and what would happen if I just let it burn, and would I free myself from this crazy life that I've bought into, you know what I mean? And so it it harkens back to us remembering that detail, or and if maybe not, we don't remember that detail, also works just as well. Just, you know, any person that's staring at a burning fire, mesmerized and kind of paralyzed by it, something is stewing in them. But that nod back to that scene, that moment shared between Carmi and Marcus, I thought was just also really smart, just so rewarding and so satisfying to feel the meaning of that moment for Carmi and him. We can infer that he's also thinking about like he's just been beaten down and it's stressful, and he's just like, man, like what if I just let this continue to burn? What would happen? And all of his coworkers quickly jump in to save it, but you can see that it's really indicative of his headspace at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then by the end, his little shorthand few sentence conversation with Sydney, and, you know, metaphorically, they are burning it down, but not for destruction, but to rebuild it into something else where they can dream and create together. And it ends on like a hopeful note of like, oh, some sort of understanding has come between these two characters and they can move forward to create something new out of this place. It doesn't need to be Mikey's restaurant anymore, but it can be something new. And I think that is another really beautiful element to this. You know, you see that destruction and like, oh, just let it all burn, but he's choosing like the healthier version of that, of like, we're gonna let it go to create something new in its place, instead of having to keep things exactly the same, or instead of having to just destroy the thing completely and walk away. But we can still honor what used to be here, but we can create what we want it to be. And I think it's an appropriately hopeful ending, and it still makes sense for the characters and where they find themselves.
Yep. Yep. And what I love about that moment with Sydney and Carmi is one that it happens so late in the episode. Like I was waiting the whole episode to be like, they haven't they haven't crossed paths yet. Neither has reached out yet. Like what is going to happen? Because I think that their growth and their trust that's being built between them over the course of the entire season is so central that you're just wondering, you're waiting and wondering what will happen between the two of them. And I love in actually both the reconciliation that happens between Carmi and Marcus and then Carmi and Sydney, that the show doesn't need to give you this full conversation that happens between the two of them, but there is this mutual understanding of like, we're good. Like we're not perfect yet. It's going to take time for us to mend and reconcile, but we're on the same page. And the little ways that the show does that is so good. And again, it's sentimental and it tugs on your heartstrings because it's not overly done up. And the show really nails it when it comes to that. So that little moment between Carmi and Marcus, and then that little moment at the end between Carmi and Sydney, I thought were just so well constructed and not too much. Perfect, right bit. So good.
And I love it when Carmi and Sydney are texting, and Carmi acknowledges that his behavior wasn't appropriate, and Sydney's response is correct.
Yep.
And I love that, instead of being like, oh, it's okay, like that whole thing that is like weirdly tempting for women to do, which is just a silly thing. She draws that boundary and is like, yeah, what you did was not okay, and I'm not going to let you off the hook. And I love that she is willing to draw those boundaries. She's willing to stand up for herself, and she knows that she is deserving of respect and will not accept anything less than that. And so I think what a testament to this character. And I also think that she is just such a great example for like young women to understand, like, hey, we do deserve better, and we can advocate for ourselves, and we can call people out when they are not acting appropriate, and we can draw boundaries, and that's healthy and good. So it's such a quick moment, but I really, really love that is her response to him.
Yes, yes, and it gives him the space and opportunity to apologize fully. Like he kind of acknowledges like my behavior was not good, or he's like what I did was not okay, but there isn't the fullness of like, man, I messed up, I'm sorry. And so she's engaging but still giving him the space and the opportunity to follow up. I think his next line is like, I'm sorry I did that, that was not cool. I also just kind of love that he starts the conversation with like more acid, and she's just like question mark, question mark, question mark. I just feel like it was very fitting for their dynamic and who they are as characters, for Carmi not to just hit her straight with a like, hi, I'm so sorry, this is me, I need to apologize over text. Like, this is how they connect and bond, and kind of opens up the conversation without hitting straight right into it. So I thought that was just like, again, really great writing and a really great understanding of who these two characters are and how their dynamic is.
Because emotions are hard, like Carmi was the worst. So yeah, he needed a way to ease into that conversation.
Yep. And you've seen them throughout the season bond over food and their love of refining and creating amazing dishes and whatnot. So it felt like just this way to signal like, I'm trying to reconnect with you. This is my way to do it. And then I also have some things to share that are hard to articulate, and we're going to get there in the next couple texts. So good.
Well, and in this episode, we get to also learn more about Sydney as she is talking with Marcus and cooking for Marcus and all of that, and just learning more of her backstory, but also really seeing her in her element. We've known that she's a really talented chef. We know that she's ambitious. We know that she's a good leader, empathetic, all of these things. But I feel like in this episode, we get to see her really shining in that creativity, and also better understanding her love of food and wanting to use food as a way to like connect with people and care for people. And it's this like, even in cooking, she is deeply empathetic, and I think that that's just such a wonderful trait for her. But then we also learn that the best meal she ever had was
Mm-hmm.
Carmi's, and so that just adds that other layer of explaining why Sydney is doing this and why she put up with so much from him. And it's because she knows what he is capable of, and it's just such a cool way to show all of these things through her just having a conversation with a friend and cooking dinner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like you get to really see their their trust and their rapport with each other through that scene. Like I think there obviously were moments where we've seen them really connect over the course of the season, but not a long extended scene like that. So that was really neat. And I love the little bit, again, another callback to the season as a whole, but when Marcus teases her about the veal stock, I just feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's such a way to signal one, like, hey, I trust you and I know that you can take it, and we're gonna bond in this way. But two, like, you know that you're over it with something when you can like joke about it with each other, and she takes it like a champ too. And so I feel like that was such a way to again continue to show one, the origins of that trust and relationship that was built between the two of them early on in the season, but then two, also the way that they've really built a strong trust with each other and a connection with each other. So I thought that that little moment was such a great callback, and also signaling like, yo, we're homies now.
Which I am here for. I love Sid and Marcus conversations. Like, can we just have like more side moments of
Right.
them
Just hanging
just
out.
hanging out? Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
so fun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then in that same conversation too, I love that there is a little moment, a little nod that Marcus has to like him acknowledging, yeah, I got a little caught up in the donuts. You know what I mean? And Sydney creates such a safe space for him and understanding by saying like we're all a little crazy when we get into that headspace, into that environment of the kitchen. And so she doesn't say like, no, you were all good. Like she acknowledges like, yes, you did, but also I understand too. I've been there, and it's such a great little moment as well. And they don't dwell too long on it, but it is there and it is kind of signaling much of Marcus's growth and self awareness as well.
And the acknowledgement of the donut off the floor.
Yes, I love it.
They're just, everybody's out here just eating donuts off the floor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. All right. What else happens in this episode that we wanted to talk about?
I mean, should we talk about Richie getting arrested, being in holding for a good long time, unsure if he's going to get charged with manslaughter?
Manslaughter.
Oh my lord.
Oh, there were a lot of great Richie moments in this episode. Him earlier, I think it's like the first 20 minutes of the episode, him with Sweeps or somebody talking about how like if Sydney almost missed, he would have aimed directly for his primary important
Mm. Mm-hmm.
digestive
It was
function, you know.
Ibra.
Ibra,
Yeah.
yes, yes. Um, so good. So great.
Yeah. And then Ibra says, I've sewn assholes.
Yes.
All right. That's that's on brand for
Mhm.
Ibra. I appreciate that.
And it's funny because the camera's like not on either of them having this conversation. It's like pointed
Yeah.
into the kitchen, which I think just makes it funnier because you're just like, oh, the things that come out of these side conversations. It's great.
Mm-hmm. It's so funny.
Yeah. Well, there's a really great moment with Richie when he calls. Is it Natalie? Is it Natalie? Is it Tiffany? His wife,
Tiff.
Tiff. Yes. Um, there's a really great moment where you see him making that call, and he clearly started the conversation wanting to share and ask for help, but you see him back away from it. And I feel like we've seen him share about uh, just constantly being the bearer of bad news when it comes to his family and the people that he can rely on. And I feel like there is such a great human moment there of just like he just couldn't bring himself to do it again. And so then he Carmi, and it then pays off to that really great moment between the two of them in the car, where you know Richie's a dude that doesn't express so explicitly how he feels, especially hard things, especially vulnerable things, and his ability to tell Carmi so explicitly, like, "Hey man, you're all I got." That was just a really great moment between the two of them, and we've seen them just fight like siblings for so much of this season. So again, some of the payoffs in the relational dynamics between the two of them, it's really great in this season finale.
And before Richie gets arrested, before the fight breaks out, when Richie and Carmi are smoking outside, they have that little moment where they're both sharing about their guilt when it comes
Yeah,
to what happened to Mikey. And I think that's such a good place to end this season, showing once again how these two are very similar to each other,
yeah,
but in very ways. You know, they both carry this guilt over Mikey's death. And it's Richie because he was there and he wasn't able to stop it, and Carmi because he wasn't there and wasn't able to stop it. And so it's interesting that they are dealing with the same things again, but for very different reasons, and they're both processing through it very differently from each other. So I think again that compare contrast that we've kind of seen
mm,
throughout the season, we get to see again here.
yeah, yeah, so good. And I I love that conversation starts out with Richie just being like asshole, and Carmi's like, I'm literally
Yeah.
just standing here doing nothing. He's like, I wasn't talking about you. So great. Even in an episode like this one, I would say, arguably compared to some of the other previous episode, is like pretty heavy on the emotions and the emotional moments. They still figure out a way to weave those moments of levity in, and then they have this really intense conversation after that. But it starts really funny and kind of disarming, and then they hit you right in the gut in all the best ways for the rest of that conversation. It's so great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And another little maybe callback to an earlier episode is uh, when Richie gets out of holding, Carmi is driving Richie's car. Once again, a callback to the fact that Richie's license is suspended,
Right.
which is just so funny. Again, that Richie has a car that other people drive him around in because he shouldn't drive. So again, those little nuggets where if you remember back to, I think it was episode 2, then it's funny. But if you don't, like, it's still a weighty emotional moment that's really important to the plot. So once
Yeah.
again, well done in those little details.
Yes. Yes. Another little Richie moment that I really loved is in the last couple minutes when Sydney shows up. The two of them had the big blowout in episode 7.
Mm-hmm.
I love
Yeah.
that Richie's the one out of all of them to invite Sydney into the tomato party. And he does it in his Richie way to be like, come on, what are you standing there for? Like, quick, come on, get it here, you know? And it's such a, again, subtle way, sentimental way for the show to signal, like, hey, the beef between the two of them, no pun intended, um, it's cleared. It's in the past. Like, let's move on. You know, and I love that Richie's the one out of everybody else to invite her in, especially with the history that they had and kind of the big fight that they just had not too long ago. I thought that was a really sweet little moment as well.
Mm-hmm. So like Richie,
Yeah,
he contains multitudes.
he's a big softie. Yes.
He is.
Okay. Other things that we wanted to mention in this finale?
Yeah, Tina is
Yes.
finally wearing a blue apron.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. I love it. I love to see it. I have been a fan of Tina since day one. And it's just
She
so
shines in this episode.
great to see
Mm-hmm.
how her character has just grown over this season, and we see her learning to adapt to that change, and also learning that change isn't like an insult to Mikey, and it's not detracting from who he was, but it's just a different way of doing things. And so it's so cool to see her kind of balancing those two things. And she even says, like, you know how much I loved Mikey, right? And yet she is also on this team, and she is taking a leadership role in this team, and it's just so great to see her,
Mm-hmm.
visually as part of the team instead of wearing her old apron. So I
Little
saw that in this
details.
episode and I was like, yes, go Tina.
Yes, yes. She is the emotional core for a lot of these people. I love the moment where she checks up on Carmi when Carmi's pouring over the KBL charges, and she's like, "Hey, like, you good? Let's talk." Like she's holding space for him, which is really great. And then there's there's another fun little Tina moment where Richie comes back, and she's like, "My little felon, welcome back."
Yeah.
It's so great. Oh, yeah, she plays a key role in this group. I think as one of the older women, and kind of the emotional intelligence that she has to detect how people are feeling, and to create space for them is really significant. So we get to see some of those moments in her throughout this episode.
Yeah, and she's also just like part of the crew and ready to have fun and ready to like joke and make fun of people too. It's so fun to see her interacting with all of the characters and kind of getting out of her shell to some degree and actually like being herself instead of, kind of guarded how we saw her in the first episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the common thread for so many of these characters, for Carmi as well, is that you see them so like with their walls up in the first episode, and there's this sense of distance, and they're pushing people away. They don't want anybody to know who they really are. They don't want to share. But for almost every single one of the characters, they have opened up and really connected with each other, and kind of unfolded so much of themselves with each other. And I think that's why it makes this really emotionally satisfying to see these characters grow in that way.
Yeah, we're rooting for all of them.
Yeah,
And
really
so
though.
it's so impressive that this show has been able to show us those moments of growth for everybody. There's so
Yes.
many characters in this that we're following, and
Mm-hmm.
we see them all grow and change and evolve and adapt in some way, while
Yep.
also like nobody is perfect and nobody does everything perfectly too. They all screw up. And so I'm so impressed that this show has so many different three-dimensional characters, and they are all, you know, growing and regressing all together all at the same time, and it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
feel too overwhelming or too difficult to keep track of.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So true. Uh any other last little shout outs? If not, I have one more.
Okay, can we just talk about some like silly lines
Yes.
throughout this
Yes.
episode? um so there's the fact moment where
Okay,
he's
that's
talking
the
to the
one I
video
wanted to
game.
talk about. Yes.
He just says, "Do you ever feel sad?"
It's also just the perfect contrast to this like really deeply emotional monologue from Carmi at the beginning, and then cut
Yeah.
to Zach's version of it. Oh, that was great. That was really great. It's just like, and it's also just like the camera's like right up in his face, as he's staring into the whatever name of the game, Ball Busters or whatever it's called.
Oh, he's so funny. Um, there's another moment between Tina and Ibra, and Ibra is talking about like back home he used to be da 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 da, and she's like, "Shut up, you old bitch!" And Ibra's response is, "That's sexist." And I love the way
Yeah.
that those two interact because they
Uh-huh.
have such different like energies behind
Yep.
them. And Tina is like so quick and so cutting, and Ibra is just like so sweet,
Sweet.
but
Yes.
is also willing to call stuff out, but in a really sweet way. I don't know. Those two crack me.
Yeah, I love that little moment. That was so great. It happens early on too, like right after the big Carmi scenes. You're just like, okay, we need some moment of levity. Let's just hang out for a hot sec and catch our breath.
And then another Ibra moment that I loved is when he finds the bra or the bikini top, like whatever it was, on his station, and he's like, this is my station. This is not respect." And I loved it. I was like, yes, Ibra, you deserve better than that. Yes.
Yes. And here's the thing, there's still so many characters that I'm like, even after a whole season, I want more. We need more of them. You know, that there's a bunch of stuff with sweeps that we haven't really like gotten to spend as much time with. So uh
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more. There's a lot more. And yet we've already
Mm-hmm.
spent so much time with these people, and it feels like there's just so many more moments with them. We're waiting for it. Ibra's one of them, Sweeps is one of them. Even Fac, you know? Just want more.
Well, we do know
Mhm.
that Gary keeps it clean. So that's why they're willing to eat off of the floor, because Gary's good at his job.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
way to go, sweetie.
Way to go, Gary. Yep. All right. Shall we give out some awards?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Here we go. First category is Top Chef. Which character is receiving this award this week?
I'm going to give this to Sweeps and Tina for
Oh.
putting out the fire.
Yes. Very important.
Yeah, they did a good job.
They did a good
Jumped
job.
right in.
Right in. Yes. I'm giving this award to Sydney for, she doesn't do it in this episode, but it's real in this episode, for eating Marcus's donut off the floor. That's how you know you got a real friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You're not wrong. Like
Mhm. That's some dedication.
That's a big deal.
I'm committed to your passions, and I will eat it wherever it comes from. All right, next category is Achievement in Chaos. Who is receiving this award and for what?
I am giving it to Mikey for storing a ridiculous amount of money in tomato cans.
Yes. Oh, that reveal was amazing. It was really amazing. So good.
Yeah, what a choice.
I know. Yeah. Well, I have so many questions related to that I'm sure the next season might clue us into. But like, there's so many questions because they owe Uncle Jimmy like a shit ton of money too. So perhaps this is just part of his plan to help Carmi really get to take off and do his thing. I don't know. It's a choice. It's a choice indeed. I'm giving the award for Achievement in Chaos to Richie for his potential manslaughter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Just
solid.
Spiciest line. Who's getting this award this week?
Okay. I am giving it to the pen holder that is covered in duct tape. And on that duct tape, it is written, Carmi is an asshole.
Yeah.
And what I'm not sure. I did not go back and do my due diligence, but I think it might be written in Carmi's handwriting. I could be wrong, but either way, it's still a great line that is just sitting there
So good.
on the pen holder.
Yes. There's also just like another little shot that happens at some point. I forget why, but Carmi's like pouring out a bunch of pens and you just see the Sharpie perfectly falling out, which I feel like was such a fun little callback too of like his absolute breakdown over not having a Sharpie. Little things, little details like that are so fun. I'm giving this award for spiciest line to Sydney for her text correct after Carmi says my behavior is not okay.
And there's multitudes contained in that correct too, which is impressive.
Yep. All right. Any other last thoughts before we wrap up our review of the finale?
Jen, I just remembered that we did not talk about like a pivotal part of this episode where Richie gives Carmi Mikey's note.
Oh, like, yeah.
There's so much in this episode that we completely forgot that part. And what I love about that scene is that Richie doesn't play it off. Like he could have pretended that he just saw it and found it for the first time and then given it to Carmi right away. But instead of doing that, he picks it up and then he explains why he delayed giving it to him. And so I love that reveals so much about Richie too. Like sometimes he's a jerk and the worst, but it's not this like malicious, pre-planned, thought out thing. And so I loved the simplicity of him giving Carmi that note and his honesty and sharing about that. It was so sweet and so tender.
Yeah. Well, and I think it also signals like because Richie's just such a like bull in a china shop in general in every scene with everyone,
Mhm.
but it
Yeah.
signals how much there is an emotional intelligence that he has as well, the intuition he has to know like this is gonna be a lot, and then if it's gonna feel real that Mikey is gone the minute that Carmi will get to read whatever is in there. So his ability to like be aware of that and articulate it is also quite incredible. Um, he's so brash in a lot of ways, but the emotional intelligence is there, and I feel like we got to see some of those little moments too. What I love about that scene is also how long the camera just stays on the two of them. And the acting and the timing between the two of them is also really great because Carmi's just kind of in shock for a long time. And the pacing and the ability for the scene to just live in that moment and to get us to just sit in that moment and not rush through it, I thought was so well done. And then the scene right after where Carmi's outside, like we're there for a while with him as he's just like feeling the weight of whatever he's about to read. And I love that the show chooses to let us just sit in that moment for much longer than I expected. So I thought that was really, really well done. Some long shots.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a longer episode, and those extra minutes are definitely warranted to help us really sit in those really difficult emotions and kind of process through things with these characters as they're going through it. So just so smart of this show, and they understand, we need that time.
Yep.
So not giving us too much time and not giving us too little, but hitting that just right spot so that we can
Mm-hmm.
feel all of the things without it ever dragging.
Yes. Yes. So good. The whole episode, I was like, where is this envelope? Surely it is going to come. Got like 12 minutes left. And then it finally
Yep.
shows. I'm like, here we go. But yeah, the I think I mentioned this earlier, but the show is not afraid of letting us wait, and it really does deliver on the payoff. Rewards us for waiting. And that we do.
Hmm. Yep. Yep.
Yep.
And it's worth the wait.
Yep. All right. Well, this was our review and discussion of the season finale of The Bear Season 1. You can find it available to stream on Hulu. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of TV and Us. Our name sums it up. We're big fans of TV and the powerful ways we connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today as we wrapped up our journey through The Bear Season 1. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review, letting us know your thoughts about Episode 8. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at tvnspod, or email us at tvnspod@gmail.com. We will be back very soon with more TV and Us. And our journey is not ending here. So stay tuned. Keep checking back on our feed. We're going to be back sooner than you can look. All right. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again very soon.